You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
looking at my calendar. Okay, we're going to release this episode on Monday, so that'll all be great.
Perfect.
Right. Well, let's jump in and get started. I'll count us down from 3, and I'll bring you in. Okay.
Great.
Right. In 3, 2, 1. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to have Brian Freeman back on the show with me today. We were just having a good laugh because Brian was on the show about 4 years ago almost, it seems like, episode 153. Brian, we are well past episode 900 now, so there's been a few shows since we talked last, and I'm super happy to have you back. Welcome back to the show.
Absolutely, thank you. It's great to be back with you.
For sure. Brian, I listened back through our previous interview this morning, and I begin each show with a new author asking kind of what their first memory is of wanting to be a writer or storyteller. And you had this great story of a book that just really kind of turned you inside out, and you knew that you had to be a writer after that. Do you ever still kind of connect with those old feelings of what it feels like to be a new writer doing things brand new? I know you've had an illustrious writing and publishing career in these intervening years, but do you ever connect back with that first feeling that got you really wanting to do this, to tell stories to people?
I do, and honestly, it's a little funny. It kind of fits in perfectly with what we're talking about this week because writing the Bourne Evolution has had me thinking all week about being 17 years old back when the Bourne Identity came out, and it's kind of like having life come full circle because it takes me back to those days in the late 70s when I was a teenager and reading a lot of great novels. I remember reading Robert Ludlum's The Chancellor manuscript and Trinity by Leon Uris and a bunch of things by James Michener and Irving Wallace, and all those folks made me think, those are the great stories out there, and I'd love to be able to do that. So it's kind of like life coming around again 40 years later. It's reminding me of those early days when I had all those dreams about being a writer.
No doubt. I know that the Bourne Evolution, which is your brand new book, and it's when people are hearing this, it's been out for a little less than a week. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But the Bourne Evolution is the 15th Bourne book. Is that right?
I think that is right. Yeah, I think there were 14 before it. There were 3 books that Robert Ludlum had done, the Bourne Identity, the Bourne Supremacy, and the Bourne Ultimatum. And then in the 2000s, Eric von Luesboter took over the series after Mr. Ludlum passed away. He wrote another 11 Jason Bourne novels. And then, of course, you have all of those wonderful Matt Damon movies as well. So there have been a lot of iterations of Jason Bourne over the years. But as I started in, I really kind of wanted to reboot the whole project. So the most common question I've had from readers this week has been, oh my gosh, do I need to go back and read 14 books to catch up with what's going on? And I tell them, no. This new book, The Bourne Evolution, stands on its own. It's kind of like an all new introduction to the character. And so people can dive right in.
I love that, and there's so much that I want to ask you about, taking a character like Jason Bourne and or this whole Treadstone world and how you kind of make that your own. But this being the 15th Bourne book, how many books does this make for you, Brian Freeman?
Well, the funny thing is I've kind of lost count at this point, but I think we're somewhere around 22 or 23. So I've upped my pace in the last few years, so that number has been growing at a fairly alarming rate. So.
I love it. Brian, do you ever find yourself struggling for a new story idea? It's kind of a trite question that gets asked to writers a lot. Where do your ideas come from? But do you ever find yourself lacking for something new to write about?
I don't think it's a question of lacking things to write about. I think if anything, sometimes you have the challenge of how do you pick what you're going to do next. I mean, strange as it sounds, it's kind of like walking into Target or Walmart in the toothpaste aisle, and you're staring at 85 different varieties of toothpaste on the shelf, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, if only there were like two or three, it would be easy to pick. But all those ones out there, you sort of get paralyzed. And I think in some ways, writers face the same thing. I mean, I think I keep a file of ideas for future books, and there's a lot of different stories and themes and characters that I'd love to explore. And one of the challenges is kind of how do you hone in on what do you want to do next, and what kind of story do you want to tell? So for me, it's sort of a question of not so much, oh my gosh, where's the next idea coming from, but how do you sort of decide what's going to be the next project? What characters do you want to bring to life?
Well, the one reason that question is kind of trite is exactly what you said. There's rarely a lack of ideas, but for most people, if you just open your ears and your eyes and you just kind of pay attention to the world around you, there are all sorts of story ideas, and especially if you like to play the what if game with literally anything. But
Yes.
there's something kind of special about that idea that floats a little higher than the others. It's kind of kind of the discussion that writers like to have about the golden idea. Is there one idea that's better than the others, or is it the skill of the writer that can take any idea and make a story out of? But do you ever notice those ideas that kind of float a little higher than the rest? Like, there really might be something to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are sometimes ideas that just pop into your head, and you just know that's the perfect concept. I've had great book concepts that have taken really weeks to take shape in terms of where I'm going with the concept, and I've had great book concept that literally in a day and a half, all the pieces just kind of fit together in my head. So when it happens like that, usually you've got something special there. And so there are books like that where you just feel like you kind of know that someone's looking down at you and saying, "Yep, this is what you got to do," because sometimes it just happens fast.
Well, knowing your kind of your catalog of the things that you write, when I see a new Brian Freeman book, I know that this is going to be a fast-paced book. It's going to be a tale that kind of hits all of those thriller notes. And that I'm going to deeply care about characters that Brian is going to absolutely torture. How would you describe kind of what makes a Brian Freeman story?
That's a great question. What I'm always trying to do is this balancing act. I mean, I write thrillers, and that means I want you to have to keep turning the page to find out what happens next. One of my favorite emails was from a reader who said she'd been reduced to taking illicit bathroom breaks at work to get another chapter. I think that's my goal as a writer is you have to find out what's happening next in the story. And at the same time, I'm also trying to just weave those characters around your mind and your heart and make you feel that you are intensely emotionally connected to the story of these characters, and that you care about what's going to happen to them. In many cases, both the good characters, the protagonists, and some of the characters that do the worst things. By the time you get to the end of the book, I want you to have that deep connection to all the characters, and so that's the balancing act. Is I write thrillers that tend to have an emotional core. And I think that the interesting challenge for me about the Bourne evolution is that it's always fun. It's always adrenaline fueled to write action scenes. There's so much action in a Bourne novel, and it just kind of you want to have this propulsive narrative when you're talking about a Jason Bourne novel. And yet at the same time, I think that what has made Bourne such an enduring, iconic character for literally 40 years is the fact that he's not just this sort of loner superhero. I mean, what I think really makes readers care about him is that he's struggling with his identity. He's lost his past. He doesn't know who he is. He's trying to figure himself out. And I think that's something that any human being can kind of relate to in terms of trying to really make that decision about who am I as a person. That's Bourne's whole life. And so for me, it was that very much that same kind of balancing act that I have in all of my books, that, I want that propulsive narration that keeps you turning the pages, but I also want you to be sort of immersed in who Jason Bourne is and bring back sort of the original vision that Ludlum had of Bourne in that very first book 40 years ago. So that character really comes to life again.
Brian, would you describe yourself as a plotter or a pantser or some variation, some mixture of the two?
Yeah, I'm kind of a hybrid. If you had asked me, 10, 12 years ago, I would have said, I'm a plotter all the way. I need to know where I'm going. I want to have a detailed outline that takes me through the whole book. Honestly, in the past decade or so, I've really gone away from that. I still like to have the plot thought out. I still do a chapter outline, but it's much looser than it ever used to be in the past. Really now it's more of a roadmap where I kind of have benchmarks of things I want to do during the course of the narration, taking me through from the beginning to the end. It's kind of keeping me on track. But so much of the writing process is actually very organic and spontaneous. And so the characters evolve during the course of the book, and the story will take me in some new directions. Not necessarily the backstory. I mean, who does what to whom and why typically does not change, but how I relate that story to the reader and how I build the suspense, that can evolve a lot during the course of the writing process. And I think that makes it fresher and more spontaneous for the reader as well. Makes me a little more neurotic because every day I wake up and go, oh my God, what am I going to do today? But I think it just gives an immediacy to the storytelling that is great for the reader.
Well, I would imagine that as many books as you've written, when you're writing a Brian Freeman book, there is kind of a relatable experience, like the beginning of a book. I would imagine that you kind of go through similar motions when starting a story like this. But when you're taking on a project like Jason Bourne, did you find that your creative process changed, was different? Were there any other sort of things that had to do with the collaboration that you had to factor in? Kind of how did this project differ from a typical book thriller that you would write?
Sure. Well, it is certainly a different challenge, kind of stepping into the shoes of someone else's character, and particularly stepping into the shoes of really a giant in the thriller world like Robert Ludlum. So the first thing I did was go back and read the Ludlum Bourne books and some of Ludlum's other novels as well. I've read them all, over the course of my life. I've lost track of how many times I've read the Bourne Identity in my life, but I wanted to go back and reread them just to kind of get another flavor from a writer's standpoint of how Ludlum did what he did, and sort of be able to kind of learn those lessons as I started approaching the process. So I think the creative process for me was pretty much the same. I mean, right, I have a process I follow in writing a book, and that works for me. But I wanted to sort of overlay that with how do I write a book that is true to the kinds of stories that Ludlum told and the character he created in Jason Bourne. And people have asked, well, did you try to write a book in the Ludlum style? And it's like, no, not really, because I think if you try to imitate someone's style, it ends up feeling like a caricature. And so instead, I was just trying to tell the story in a way that was true to how Ludlum told stories. And when you read a Robert Ludlum book, there's just kind of this raw dramatic power to the prose. He writes very sort of emotional dramatic prose that just sort of pulls you into the story. And so I was approaching the story and the characters in the same way, not really trying to tell it in a Ludlum style. I was still really telling it in my style, but I think by thinking it through like a Ludlum novel, it comes out feeling like what I hope is a very nice hybrid of my storytelling and Ludlum storytelling.
Want to grow as a writer and take your writing to the next level? Give Pro Writing Aid a try. Pro Writing Aid is a grammar checker, style editor, and writing mentor in one package. Pro Writing Aid will never replace a human editor. Rather, it helps you self-edit to a deeper level so that when you send it off to an editor, they will be able to focus on the meat of your writing and not spend their time fixing basic writing issues. Pro Writing Aid is the only platform that offers world-class grammar and style checking combined with more in-depth reports to help you strengthen your writing. Our unique combination of suggestions, articles, videos, and quizzes makes writing fun and interactive. Writing can be grammatically perfect but still feel awkward and clumsy. Pro Writing Aid searches out elements like repetitiveness, vague wording, sentence length variation, over-dependence on adverbs, passive voice, overcomplicated sentence structures, and so much more. Nothing makes a writer lose credibility faster than spelling and grammar mistakes. Submit clean, error-free writing. Go to ProWritingAid.com and use code HANK20 for 20% off of Pro Writing Aid Premium. Pro Writing Aid. Check it out today. Noveler is the best way to write a novel. Why? Quite simply because we've made it the easiest place to do it. Writing a novel is hard enough. Noveler takes care of all the logistical bits of writing a novel, just leaving that small matter of the words to you. It's a clean, beautiful writing interface with writing analytics, goals and streaks, advanced grammar checking, version control, day, evening, and night modes, and many other features designed to take all the stress out of writing. Tell us what you need and we'll build it. Together, we'll build a better tool. With a design-led approach, all the right tools that you need, Noveler saves all your words constantly, allows you to manage and order your novel easily. It's accessible from any device, desktop or mobile. It syncs to Google Drive and Dropbox. It allows exports in various formats, including ebook and more. It also has nice touches like allowing you to write both offline and online, unique for a web-based platform. Everyone needs help with their writing from inspiration through to grammar checking, so we're doing our best to provide that support. We integrate that support directly into Noveler. Our advanced grammar checker powered by Pro Writing Aid does everything from spell check to style advice. Our writing courses include the incredible Tim Clare's Couch to ADK. We're really excited to offer all Author Stories listeners 30% off Noveler for a whole year. And it doesn't matter if you choose to sign up for the monthly or annual plan. You'll get 30% off. All you need to do is use the discount code HANK when you sign up. Noveler, Novlr. That's noveler.org. I remember as a young man picking up the first Bourne book by Robert Ludlum and enjoying it immensely. And I have this memory of our first child was born in 95, and I think I was reading
one of those around that time. And then, fast forward 10 years or so from there, and we get these great movies that came out, like you mentioned earlier. And I wanted to revisit those books. And I was quickly reminded that these books were written in the 1970s.
Yes.
And the movies, of course, were kind of fast forwarded and retrofitted for today's tech and that sort of things. But
Yep.
we have scenes like Jason going into a phone booth and hacking a payphone and
Yeah.
things like that. And you're quickly reminded, oh, this was a few decades ago.
Right. Right.
Um, and they did a great job with the movies of keeping the character mostly intact but moving the story forward and all of that. But as someone who's writing the books, and like you mentioned that you've got this great opportunity to kind of reboot the character, were some of those things factors at all to you? Like this is a story that has evolved and grown over the decades. But let's not forget where he started from. So how do
Yes.
you take a character like that in these original settings, keep the spirit of that true while moving it forward for an audience in 2020 or 2019 when you were writing it or whenever it was?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's exactly right. I mean, when you look back at there have been so many iterations of Bourne. I mean, obviously the Ludlum books, the von Lussbader novels, the Damon movies. I am old enough to even remember when it wasn't Matt Damon who was Jason Bourne. It was Richard Chamberlain.
Oh my gosh,
Yes,
yes.
in a 1988 ABC miniseries with Jacqueline Smith as Marie St. Jacques.
I
So,
forgot all
yeah.
about that. That is amazing. I need to
So,
find that on YouTube or
oh,
something.
it was my guilty pleasure. I mean, when I got the VHS tapes, and whenever I was homesick from work, I would put on that version of the Bourne Identity. It was very true to the original book, really unlike the movies that followed very closely to the plot of the original. But the point is, clearly you go back through all these different visions of Bourne, and then you go back to the original novel, and Bourne's roots are in Vietnam. None of this would work in
Sure.
a book in 2020. So yeah, what I was trying to do was figure out what makes this character so iconic and enduring, and it's really his it's his humanity, his fragility as a person, and I was trying to bring that back. I think when you read the Ludlum Bourne novels, you realize that Jason is actually someone that is not a loner like Matt Damon's movies portray him. He really needs a relationship in his life, and his relationship with Marie is at the center of all three of Ludlum's Bourne novels. So
Right.
I wanted to have not the loner Bourne in my book, but to have him really caught up in a relationship that sort of tests that part of his soul that needs someone with him in life. And then when it came to plotting, the interesting thing is I was looking back at the era in which Ludlum came out of as he was telling his stories, and clearly it's a post-Vietnam, post-Watergate era in which there's a lot of distrust of government. There's a lot of conspiracy theories flowing around society, a lot of dissension and divisiveness in the world. Well, let's take a look at 2020 and see how we're doing here.
There's no story fodder in 2020, is there?
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that so many of the sort of cultural elements and political elements that were factors in Ludlum's 1970s are factors again today, and so it actually felt quite normal to be able to drop an all new version of Jason Bourne down into this environment, because there's we're sort of going back to some of that conspiracy oriented shadowy organizations trying to shape things, the big tech and privacy issues. All these things have echoes from the 1970s, and so it just made it felt perfectly natural to have that be Jason Bourne's world.
Well, speaking of that, if we compare Mr. Ludlum's original trilogy with what you can do as a writer today, um, do you think it was easier for him or harder, and by extension for you, to tell a story like this in 1975 versus 2020. We didn't have the constant connectedness in 1975 that we have in 2020. We didn't have the mass dissemination of information that we have today. I mean, of course, we can't speak for him, but how do you feel like that writing a story like this is different today than it would have been in 1975?
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, for one thing, Ludlum was really one of the pioneering thriller writers. So he
Yes,
was
absolutely.
he was doing things that nobody had ever done before. And it's funny, that it comes up in all the different arts. There comes a point where people look back and say, well, was that really all that special? What the Beatles did or what so and so did? And it's when you realize that they were doing it. And it had never been done before. That is
Right.
what I mean. They're laying the groundwork and the foundation for everything that follows. So for me, I mean, clearly there have been some wonderful, wonderful thriller writers in the decades since, and so many different thriller stories being told. Finding a way to still craft something that's compelling and unique and fresh. Is more of a challenge, I think, today because, of course, Ludlum was in a ground where nobody had been doing what he'd been doing, and so in the 40 years since then, there have been a lot of new takes on thrillers inspired by that, and you're always still looking for how do you do something in a fresh way, and from sort of a technical standpoint, I think what you're seeing these days is a lot of mystery and thriller writers are suddenly going back and writing thrillers set in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, because they're getting tired of all these damn cell phones, and the fact that everyone can be tracked everywhere and satellites know everything you're doing. It makes it certainly hard for police procedurals because it's awfully hard to kind of stay off the grid when you're committing crimes. So I think a lot of writers are going, let's go back to the days when there were no cell phones because the crimes were a lot harder to solve back then, and that makes for better books. So I think from a thriller standpoint, the challenge really was kind of embracing a world in which it is much more connected and in which there is much more technology than ever existed, back in the 1970s. And so what I was really trying to do essentially is use that as a threat. And in fact, it is the very essence of that technology that is driving the real threat and conspiracy in the novel. And it's kind of funny because, I always love when, things feel ripped from the headlines. So I love the fact that, here I've written The Bourne Evolution, which revolves around the idea of data hacks and social media companies that are invading people's privacy. And here you have all the big tech CEOs talking to Congress this week. So I appreciate, Congress giving me a little marketing boost by putting big
Right.
text in the headlines as the new book comes out.
That's amazing. So how did you get involved in this Bourne world? And you have this amazing writing career of your own, and you're crafting novels that people like me are buying every time they see a new one come out. How did Jason Bourne come into your life?
Yeah, I made a decision a number of years ago that I thought that the best way to thrive in the publishing industry, which has always been a very, very tough way to make a living, the best way to thrive for the long term was to really diversify my relationships in the business. And I felt that in the past decade or so, publishing has become very segmented in the same way that you are seeing television entertainment get segmented with all these different streaming services with different types of stories, different audiences. I think you're seeing a lot of the same kind of thing in publishing. And so what I was seeing was you still had this strong, thriving print book market. You've got now also a very strong ebook market. Audiobooks have become the fastest growing segment in publishing. And then, you see a lot of these, what I call legacy projects where sort of author brands are outliving the author, him or herself, and being, continued by co-authors. And so I talked to my agent about this and really said, I'd like to start building a number of these different relationships. And, I thought, well, maybe, another thing would pop up. Well, in fact, now I've got a strong print relationship with the folks at Blackstone to deal with my Jonathan Stride novels. And they're actually releasing the print edition of my book, The Deep, Deep Snow, in October. I have a great relationship with the Thomas and Mercer Publishing House, which they release print books, but their real focus is ebooks.
Right.
They're the ones that have done Thief River Falls and my Frost Easton series. I've got a relationship with Audible. I had an Audible original. The Deep, Deep Snow started as an Audible original and hit the New York Times audio bestseller list. And now, I've got Putnam and the Jason Bourne series doing this legacy work for the Robert Ludlum estate. So suddenly I've got four different publishing relationships, and I can look back at this and say, well, the diversification strategy was definitely effective. I don't really have any time to breathe anymore, but
Right.
but it's fun, and what makes it fun is all of these projects are so very different. And for me, creatively, that's very energizing because it means I get to tell radically different stories. What I might do for a Bourne book is so completely different from, say, my standalone Thief River Falls. And that Thief River Falls is totally different from what I might do in a Jonathan Stride novel or in something like The Deep, Deep Snow. So to me, that's it's a lot of work, but I love the idea that I put down one project and I pick up something that gets me excited all over again because it's such a unique, fresh project.
Well, and ultimately that helps you as a creative person, which then helps me as a dedicated reader because I know that everything coming from Brian Freeman now is going to be fresh and new, exhilarating, and is going to be, inspired because these are projects you've been looking forward to because you do get to shift gears, and that's good for all of us ultimately, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my hope is that readers will come along for the ride and recognize that, I never want to write the same book twice. And I'm going to take you in some different directions. But the one thing I hope will stay the same from project to project is it's going to be a Brian Freeman novel. It's going to keep you turning the pages, and it's going to have that emotional core to it. That's what I'm always trying to do in my books. I always say that when it comes to readers, they ask something rather interesting of authors, particularly with series books. They want each book to be exactly the same, but they also want it to be completely different. So, so I think that is the ultimate creative challenge for authors is to find a way to do something that is fresh and different every time, and yet have readers feel like you're staying true to certain core values in your writing that makes them understand. Yeah, this is a Brian Freeman novel.
Well, and the other side of that is, with a long-standing series, we want the stakes to be ultimately high. We want anything to be able to happen, but don't you dare kill off this main character because I want another book just like this one next year, and I want you to make me feel like it all matters.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And, I've always told readers, I'll never kill off a main character. I've occasionally killed off some supporting characters, and I took some grief from people for that. And, but I really try to steer clear of that, mostly because I think, even though I understand from a creative standpoint that kind of thing tends to open up new creative directions for particularly for a series, but it harms the reader's ability to go back and reread those novels with the same level of enjoyment, because anytime they're then rereading the earlier novels, that character is shadowed by their knowledge of what's going to happen to him or her, and that that makes it hard for them to enjoy the books in quite the same way. And I always feel as an author that I do not own these characters. I share ownership of the characters with the readers, and I think that's a responsibility that authors have to respect and take seriously.
Talking about your diversification and all of the plans that you've made for your career and the steps you've taken to kind of ensure that you always have something new and creative that you're working on. When you were making these decisions and working on this stuff last year, no one had any idea that 2020 was going to be the dumpster fire that it has turned out to be.
Yeah.
You know? But something I've been asking folks lately is how is this pandemic, this quarantine, and all of these things affected you as a creative person and as a writer? Because we all know that writers spend a lot of time alone by themselves, locked in an office, with a laptop computer or a notepad or however it is that you write, and in a lot of cases, something like a quarantine shouldn't affect writers a whole lot. But there are some psychological aspects to it that have,
Right.
kind of been seeping in. How are you personally handling this time? And has it affected you for good or for ill, that you can tell?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I think there's a lot of layers to this.
Of
I mean,
course.
sure, when you look at the practical side of it, stay-at-home orders don't have a whole lot of meaning for me and a lot of other writers. I mean, that's
Right.
what I'm always at home. I'm always working. I mean, we had probably 24 library events in the spring that all got canceled,
Right.
and it's hard because that particularly even if you're sort of an introverted introspective loner, events in many ways are your opportunity to kind of get out and connect with real people in the real world again. So when that gets stripped away, it's hard because it does sort of intensify that introversion and not always in good ways. I also think that from a creative standpoint, um, you end up with more time to write, but it is just a heck of a lot harder. I think there is this overlay of worry and fear and anger and uncertainty in the entire world that everyone feels, and I think that creative people are always going to feel that particularly intensely, and it makes it hard to immerse yourself in a fictional environment when there's so much in the real world that is kind of standing in the way as a roadblock. And so the authors that I talked to this year have all said this is a harder environment in which to be writing, even if you end up sort of having more raw time to do it. It's harder to be creative in the current climate. And the other thing is from a plotting standpoint, it'll be interesting to see how the next couple of years go, because my suspicion is that what you'll probably see starting 18 months from now is you're going to get kind of a bubble of pandemic quarantine
Yes.
sorts of thrillers coming out, and is me personally, that is the last thing I would ever want to write, and honestly it's the last thing I'd ever want to read, because once this is over, and we certainly hope it will be sometime in the not too distant future, man, I would think that the last thing anyone is ever going to want to be is reminded of that by reading a book about it. So I don't know. I guess my advice to writers would be, steer clear of this for several years until we reach a point where people can look back on it without the emotional exhaustion that we all feel right now. But who knows? I'm confident there will be some really interesting takes out there that will work well. And I had honestly, when all of the Middle East terrorism was going on after 9/11 and all that was going on, I really did not want to write anything about that, and I thought people aren't going to want to read about terrorism thrillers when they have the threat of terrorism in their real lives. But I was proven wrong. There a lot of folks have done some very successful books in that vein over the years. But that's just not what I like to do. I mean, I want to give readers something that's going to let them go into an entirely new world and not drag them back, particularly to a world that makes them feel bad about what's going on.
I'm afraid this time next year there's going to be a glut of books that have to do with 4 people being locked in a house together for months on end, and they wake up the next morning and there's a dead body in the living room.
Yes, you can see it coming, can't you?
Yeah, you can. You can. So, the Bourne Evolution is book 15 of the Jason Bourne series. You said there was a bit of a reboot of sorts. Where if we're just picking up this book and we're going to dig into it, where do we find Jason Bourne and kind of what's going on in the opening of the story?
Yeah. There've been 14 earlier books, but really I think of this as book one in what amounts to an all new series. I mean, you don't have to have read anything in the past to appreciate this book. You don't even have to have seen any of the movies or anything. I know a lot of people will have, but this really is essentially kind of book one standalone Jason Bourne. And what I was trying to do was develop a story that would kind of, make the most of this great, original iconic thriller hero. And so ultimately, I mean, when you see Jason Bourne in any of his iterations, he's kind of on the run and being hunted and can't trust anyone around him. And that's certainly still true in the Bourne evolution. It starts out with the assassination of a congresswoman, and Bourne is the prime suspect and is sort of being framed for the crime. And he ends up on the run from these, not only from his own organization, but from these shadowy conspiracy forces. And the only way that he can really sort of clear his name is to expose and defeat this conspiracy. And he winds up in hooking up with this Canadian journalist, Abbey Laurent, who helps him along the way, and they develop this what I hope is a really interesting, strong relationship between the two of them. Abbey Laurent definitely is I loved writing her as a character. She stands right up to Bourne and doesn't take any crap from him. So that's sort of the essence of the novel. It really is. It's got that sort of propulsive chase feel to it.
Were there any pieces of tech or interesting things that have evolved, no pun intended, over the several decades that Jason Bourne has been in our consciousness that were fun to play with in the writing of this book?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to really kind of make the dangers of tech kind of at the center of this. And so one of the core themes of the book is this new social media software called Presix. And Presix is a social media software that claims that it can predict what you are going to do next. And of course, in reality, what it's doing is using this massive quantity of personal data that it has gathered in order to shape people's behavior and get people to do what it and its advertisers and other dark forces want them to do. So to me, that feels very current. And honestly, I was creating this Presix software and looking at what it can do. And I was thinking to myself, well, that there is someone out there right now that's building a software that can do that. So
you know it. The new book, Robert Ludlum's The Bourne Evolution, is out everywhere now. There's links to it in the show notes of this episode. I just realized that Scott Brick narrated the audiobook. Is that right?
That is correct. And what I love is the fact that Scott also does the audio narration for Ludlum's original, The Bourne Identity.
Yes.
So that's a great combination.
Yes, and I read the arc of this book. It's been several weeks ago now, and I just realized that I'm going to download the audiobook this weekend and let Scott Brick tell me the story all over again.
Yeah, I've already getting some great feedback from listeners about it.
I love it. Well, I'm going to put links to the book in the show notes of this episode where everyone can find it. Brian, where can people find you online if they want to dig into all the great stuff that you're doing?
They can find me pretty much everywhere. If they're looking for the books, in terms of what I've written, they can go to my website. It's bfreemanbooks.com. That's all one word, bfreemanbooks.com. They can connect with me on Facebook at facebook.com/bfreemanfans. facebook.com/bfreemanfans. And I'm on Twitter at bfreemanbooks. I'm on Instagram at bfreemanbooks. So you kind of can't escape me out there on social media. And I love connecting with readers. I love having them reach out to me and let me know what they think about the book. So I always encourage people to send me emails and post on my Facebook page and send me Twitter messages and things. So it's always fun to me to see how readers react to the novels.
Absolutely. Brian, what are you working on now? Because this book is out So we know that there's another book that you've been working on for a while. What can we expect to see from you next?
Yeah, I'm going to be keeping everybody pretty busy. My next Jonathan Stride novel, Funeral for a Friend, is going to be out in September, September 22nd. And then the paperback version of my Audible original, The Deep, Deep Snow, finally arrives in late October. So all the print lovers out there can finally get their hands on The Deep, Deep Snow. And then I've finished off a standalone thriller, the most unusual thing I've ever written. I just love this book. I can't wait to put it in the hands of readers. It's called Infinite. That is going to be out next winter in March, I believe, of next year. And currently, I'm working on 2 books simultaneously, which is always an interesting creative challenge. I'm working on the second of my Jason Bourne novels, which should be out next summer. And then I'm also writing another original audiobook for Audible. So I'm doing that simultaneously. So yes, stay-at-home orders, heck, bring it on. I got plenty to do.
I love it. I love it. Brian, let's don't wait 4 years to do this again.
I agree. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. We're going to send everyone to pick up a copy of the new book and to visit you also. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you.
And we'll cut it right there. That was amazing, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. A lot of fun.
Absolutely. When we publish this show on Monday, we'll be sure to send you a link and we'll promote it everywhere.
Perfect. I will do the same thing.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Have a great weekend.
Sounds good. You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Scribophile is a respectful online writing workshop and writers community. Writers of all skill levels join to improve each other's work with thoughtful critiques and by sharing their writing experiences. We're the writing group to join if you want to find beta readers, get the best feedback around, learn how to get published, and be a part of the friendliest and most successful writing workshop online. Improve your writing by receiving detailed critiques. Learn from a vast collection of free writing resources. Make lifelong friends in our busy community of writers. Writing is a solitary art, but that doesn't mean you have to be lonely. Lucky for you, there are thousands of writers on Scribophile every day, and we're a really friendly bunch. You've never seen a writing group like this one? Join Scribophile today at scribophile.community.